Hey, have you ever not been invited to a birthday party you wish you could have gone to?
Mm-hmm. I see all the photos. It's like, oh.
Like on Facebook and Instagram and stuff like that. Yeah. Missing out on stuff. It can be hard.
Hello and welcome to the Resilient Lineage podcast, where we reflect on the past, anticipate the future, and discover what God is up to today. I'm Olivia.
And I'm Milo. When I was a kid, you would negotiate. One of your negotiations you would do with friends it was like, I'll invite you to my birthday party. Did you ever do that?
No.
Yeah, so when I was a kid, that was a thing you would negotiate to get your way with something. Is
if you give me that toy, you can come to my birthday party or something.
Or if
my
you
word.
pick me for your, because I played, sports and things like that, and like pickup sports. It'd be like, hey, pick me for your team, and I'll invite you to my birthday party.
That's tragic.
Yeah, or I'll do this for you if you invite me to your birthday party.
Oh my word!
Yeah,
that's like, no, we didn't.
That
must have been your generation.
Yeah, that was a really common thing. It was a negotiating tactic.
Oh my word!
And then when it came, so I kind of had to keep track of it all. And and there was inevitably going to be that time that you knew you had negotiated that with somebody, and you had been invited to their house, and then they didn't invite you, or times when you're like negotiating, like, if you don't do that for me, then you can't come to my birthday party. I won't say his name, but there was one kid that, amongst us, the impression I had was, as a kid, when I say kid, I'm like, this is 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, that range. I had the impression that he was like, his parents had lots of money because he had every toy that I thought was super cool. Like he just always had the latest and greatest and the newest. And turns out he was a preacher's kid. So, yeah. And he wasn't, so he would constantly kind of lord that over us. Like, well, if you do this, I'll invite you to my party. Or if you don't do that, I won't, you're not coming. I know I said you could come, but I won't come. So it was constantly back and forth. I learned that from him, and then I picked it up. And I started using it. But my parties weren't as exciting as his, so I'm not sure how. Although, Papa and Nana, I had this tradition that for my birthday, I think this started when I was 5 or 6, we would set up the tent in the backyard, and I'd have like 6 to 8, 10 guys over, and we would camp out in the backyard, and that kind of became the tradition for, probably till I was 10 or 11 years old. And then I got to the place that I could put up the tent by myself with the guys. I wouldn't need help from my parents, which was kind of fun to be able to do that sort of thing. That was part of the event. Anyway, okay, so we're talking about FOMO today. This was your idea. You put together these show notes, which is, obviously the way we do our show notes is I'll put together stuff and then I'll give them to you to look at, and you'll get your inputs and, tweak them and we'll go from there. In this case, like, you put them all together and then I kind of took them and I'm like, well, let's rework it this way, maybe that way. And so, so this is very much a collaborative effort. So why don't we do this? Why don't we look at the text we're going to look at first, the passage of scripture. Okay. I think that may be more helpful. And then we can extract out from that why we're talking about FOMO today. Yeah.
So, we're pulling from 1 Samuel, verse is like chapter 13, verses 5 through 14.
Do you want to give the backstory?
Yeah. So this is right when Israel just anointed their first king. So this is King Saul. One of the first people he has to go against, probably in the top 5, are him fighting the Philistines in this context. So basically, who is King Saul? King Saul became king after the people of Israel rejected God as their true king,
which we talked about last week.
Yeah. And so before Saul, Israel had been ruled by God and was led by spiritual leaders, which was like Moses and Joshua, then the judges, and then finally like the prophets. So Samuel, like, because it says 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel. So Samuel was a prophet during this time. Though God never intended for Israel to be like the other nations, he allowed it and commanded Samuel to anoint Saul as king. So basically at this point, right before Saul became king, Israel was upset that they had no king or no real human king and authority and like the other nations had. And we talked about this last week when the elders came to Samuel and was like, anoint us a king. And Samuel goes to the Lord and it's like, I'm just going to tell them no. And the Lord was like, let it be. They've rejected me before they've rejected you. They have not rejected you. They rejected me. So anyway, this kind of sets up this. But Saul, rather than fearing the Lord, Saul feared the opinions of other people. This fear and lack of reverence for God shaped his reign, and over time, Saul's disobedience and pride led to his downfall and ultimately caused God to reject him as king. So Saul is pretty much perceived as this bad guy most of the time.
Yeah, he starts off good.
Yeah.
Like the Lord doesn't select him because he's going to teach Israel a lesson of what it's like to have a bad king.
Right.
He selects Saul's considered to be a good guy at the very beginning, but he's given a power, he's given authority, he's given new responsibility. Now the Old Testament law does provide rules for how kings should act. In fact, you and I went to a talk at Regent University where this was discussed, where in the Jewish law that God gave Moses, God gave Israel commandments of what they should do if they end up having a king. And I've always wondered about that. Like, well, if God was always to be their king, then why did he give them rules on how a king should act? And that's always really bothered me and then what was presented at that talk, it helped bring a lot of clarity for me, was just like God gave also the rules for how to handle divorces. God doesn't want divorce, but if it's going to happen, this is how it should happen. God doesn't want Israel to have a king, but if you're going to have a king, this is how it's going to happen. You're going to choose from among you. It's not, there isn't this hierarchy. There isn't this clan of families that have wealth and power that rise to it's not like all the other ways the nations do it. So there's a very clear set of rules that set up for Saul to be for God to actually select Saul. And then we know the story. David ends up being selected after Saul. But it's not very far into his reign.
No, this is literally 3 chapters.
Yeah, that the wheels start falling off the bus.
It's like he had a good run.
Yeah, you got it. And I don't know what the timeline is.
Yeah, I don't know either. But I do know that, well, I'll get into it. We'll just get into it.
Okay, yeah.
And then,
1 Samuel chapter 13.
Yeah, so we're going to start in verse 5. And so it says, and the Philistines mustered to fight with Israel 30,000 chariots and 6,000 horsemen and troops, like the sand on the seashore in multitude. They came up and encamped in Michmash, to the east of Beth-aven. When the men of Israel saw that they were in trouble, for the people were hard-pressed, the people hid themselves in caves and in holes and in rocks and in tombs and in cisterns. And some Hebrews crossed the fords of the Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. Saul was still at Gilgal, and all the people followed him trembling. He waited 7 days, the time appointed by Samuel. But Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and the people were scattering from him. So Saul said, bring the burnt offerings here and the peace offerings. And he offered the burnt offerings. And as soon as he had finished offering the burnt offerings, behold, Samuel came. And Saul went out to meet him and greet him. And Samuel said, what have you done? And Saul said, When I saw that the people were scattering from me, and that you did not come within the days appointed, and that the Philistines had mustered at Michmash, I said, now the Philistines will come down against me at Gilgal. And I have not sought the favor of the Lord, so I forced myself and offered burnt offerings. And Samuel said to Saul, you have done foolishly. You have not kept the command of the Lord your God, with which he commanded you. Right. For then the Lord would have established your kingdom for Israel forever. But now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be prince over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you. So a little bit of backstory. If we flip literally 3 chapters over in chapter 10, this is Samuel literally giving instruction for what happened. In chapter 10, verse 8, it says, "Then go before me to Gilgal, and behold, I am coming down to you to offer burnt offerings and sacrifice peace offerings. 7 days you shall wait until I come to you and show you what you shall do." So that's the instruction. Mm-hmm. And then Saul's up there while the Philistines are coming
Saul
against him.
Saul gets impatient.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a story where, I'm not going to say that Saul was like given into FOMO. When did you say FOMO kind of became a thing?
I feel like it was like 2019.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds, I don't know when I started hearing about it, but it's been within the last 6, 7, 8 years, I would say. And so this is not like we have a new way.
Saul had FOMO.
Saul had FOMO, said, 1 Samuel chapter 13. It doesn't say that, but I think we can, I think you found a good passage that can kind of overlay onto this. Mm-hmm. What happens with people that do have that fear of missing out. And so, I like my statistics, my little bit of research I do. So consumerism, right? Marketing, you're getting a marketing degree. And there's a lot of drive to cultivate desire amongst potential consumers by creating a sense of fear that if you don't get this, you're missing out. So I found these stats that said 54% of people admit to impulse online purchases due to FOMO. 40% of millennials overspend or go into debt to keep up with their friends. That's a lot of people. 56% of people are afraid of missing out on events, news, or important updates if they stay away from social media too long. And I thought this was interesting, 67% of travelers have booked a trip based on fear of missing out.
That's a lot of numbers. That's like all above 40%.
Yeah. And there's practically, there's I want to get different type of seat covers in my truck. And so there's this, the company I want to go with, I'm saving my money towards this, but the company I want to go with is, I looked into them. I actually talked to them on the phone. Well, now I'm on their mailing list, and every week I get an email from them that says, summer sale, last chance to get this discount, buy now, while supplies last. And inevitably, every week, it's like, this deal is only good for 4 more days. But I get the same email every single week. And so they're trying to cultivate this sense of urgency and this sense of you're missing out on this if you don't do it now. But it's like, no, I can, what are you doing? And then have you ever wondered if you're on Amazon, you'll see 27% discount now, and it's like, is it really a % discount? Or do you just know that I looked at that before and you're playing around with the prices? Do you know what I mean? To create this sense of urgency, which here's a pro tip. Camel.com. Have you ever heard of this?
No.
I use this all the time.
This sounds like our first ad.
This is our podcast. It's not sponsored by anybody. It's a website. I have an account there. You can go and you can, if you're on Amazon, you can take the Amazon link and put it into camel.com, and it'll show you the price history of that product.
Whoa. So
then you can find out, oh, this is actually on sale. Like this is a good deal. Like your brother was telling me something he's like, yeah, I found this thing that was normally $150 and it was on sale for $28. And I was thinking, was it really on sale for $28? Because that's a really good deal if it was on sale for $28. So I jumped onto that website and I plugged in that product, and sure enough, the price 2 months ago, it was $160. And this last week or it dropped down to $28. I don't know why.
No, yeah, Andrew was telling me about that on the way home.
Yeah, I mean, he found a really good deal, and so, and then you'll see, so you can see different specs. My point is this: like, we live in a world, like, consumer wise, just from a marketing vantage point, we live in a world where if you are not aware of how marketing and advertising is trying to cultivate within you discontent and cultivate within you this desire to miss out on something, if you do not pay attention to that when it comes to your purchases, you will begin to experience a spiritual rot in your soul that will infect a bunch of other areas in your life. We're not going to talk about specifically how this relates to purchases, but I think it's one that we can all illustratively look at and go like, wait, I see that out there. So if I see that out there, where else is it taking place in my life? Where else could this be happening? So we're going to look into ways we can give into the spirit of FOMO. Because I think it could be a demonic spirit, actually. Ways we could give into that spirit, and then we're going to talk about ways how we could avoid or reject that spirit.
So we have like 4 ways we can give into it, and then 4 ways we can avoid it or reject it.
Yeah.
So we made it easy for you guys.
4 and 4.
4 and 4. So the first one would be impatient with others. I mean, we see that.
We see that with Saul.
Like, he's impatient with Samuel, and like, Samuel said, wait 7 days. I've waited 7 days. Bro's not here. There's the enemy coming closer and closer, and my people are afraid. I'm just going to do it.
Yeah. Well, and 2, it wasn't just that Saul waited 7 days. That can become almost the point of like, well, he did wait. But it wasn't the job of the king to offer sacrifices. That was the job of a prophet or a priest. And so Saul is getting out of his swim lane, and he's using time as a justification to get out of those responsibilities. And I think that I can be a rather impatient person, because I like to go and I like to see things happen, and I like to order my time in a way that we're going to get from point A to point B to point C to whatever, right?
Yeah, literally every trip in my entire life with Milo Critter. We don't go to trips to relax. We can do that at home.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
If I'm spending this money, we're going to get as much out of it as we possibly can. Which is bad like that. Because again, that could be a result of what?
Impatience.
FOMO.
Yeah.
Like, I went to this place and, I don't want to come back and people are like, oh, did you see this? I'm like, no, I didn't. How did you miss that, bro? It was like the most amazing part of visiting that city or going to that place or having that experience. Like, right.
Yeah.
So there's this impatient thing. And I think with Saul, he uses time as a way, Samuel's misuse of time. We don't know what held up Samuel. We're not told. But according to Saul, he's using that as a justification for him to engage in activities that he shouldn't have been getting engaged in, which just plays into this impatient thing. And I think it's like, your mom and I were talking about this the other day. I've been playing around in my mind the relationship between peace and patience. Like, if you think of people that are peaceful, they are always patient people. Do you know what? Isn't that interesting? Like, these things go hand in hand, these qualities. And I'm not sure. I was talking with a friend of mine about it yesterday, and which comes first, and which is the practice and which is the character, and so, but this idea that this impatience with others will fuel FOMO. And I would argue that if you're finding yourself impatient with others, ask yourself, what's the fear behind that?
Yeah, that's good. Second one would be insecurity within yourself. And I can just see Saul standing there, and he's like, this is my job. I just have to wait here. Like, I have no call to action other than wait. Surely that's not the role of the king. Surely that's not what a person of authority does. he could do anything with the sound of his voice because Israel will respond to him.
Maybe. They're kind of scattered.
Oh, yeah. They're hiding in tombs.
Yeah. And I, in some regards, I'm empathetic or sympathetic. I can never remember which one I'm supposed to be. Sympathetic towards Saul. Nobody's been a king before for Israel. So nobody's done this. So it's not like he doesn't have a pattern to look to. All he has is pagan patterns.
Yeah.
And he's not supposed to look towards those. And he has God's word that tells him, but there's not like a to-do manual like, oh, here's a case study about a time when the prophet was late and what do you do in this scenario? And, what are the internal questions you're going to be asking? And none of that's available to him. Yeah. Like he's the first one out of the gate. So
the guinea pig.
Yeah. And so I think anytime somebody is in a role that is new to them, it will be a time where your insecurities become exposed. And I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of people don't embrace new things, because
they don't want their insecurities exposed.
Yeah.
The third one would be control over your circumstances. So like giving into a spirit of FOMO will produce control over your circumstances.
Or the attempted control. Yeah. And again, we see that with Saul because Israel's scattered to the wind. People are hiding all over the place. They're not, right? Isn't that what's happening? Right? So
there's people leaving the land.
Yeah. So this is a time when Israel needs a strong leader. The person who's been identified as the strong leader is kind of flapping in the wind. His backup, within Israel, there was sort of a triune of structure: prophet, priests, and kings. So kings were supposed to be focused on the systems that would provide and protect for the people. So they would execute the laws and the responsibilities and make sure that everybody had everything within the kingdom to flourish. They would negotiate with other kingdoms, right, for trade practices and for, if they were to go to war or not go to war. They would ensure that the walls or the boundaries were secure so that, it was just, that was their job, was to kind of focus on the structure and system of things. The prophet was to focus on articulating the vision of what they were supposed to be as a people. Like, this is what God has said. This is who we're called to be. So there's this very forward looking, here's, don't forget where we've come from in light of where God is leading us. Right. And then priests were responsible for the rituals, kind of the cultural aspects of that shaped the culture, the community of God's people. So, how do we forgive? How do we seek forgiveness? How do we bring our offerings and our tithes? And how do we even where the tabernacle is at, where all the priests operated, was centrally located, right, with all the other tribes surrounding them. And so that like everybody having equal access to the presence of God, or only the high priest had access to the actual presence of God in the Holy of Holies, but their proximity, right, to the presence of God. So there was this sense then that Saul is ordered to have this kind of, he's the guy that's supposed to be coordinating all of these systems and efforts to organize people as a nation, and it's all unraveling in front of him. And it's not like, he waited a week. A week is a long time when you're living with chaos. It's a really long time. True. And so I don't want to like stand here and go like, can you believe Saul? It's like, I think this is where a lot of us are at. When you feel a sense of responsibility over something and you don't see that thing happening, what is, like, how patient are you? Most of us start scrambling, right? We start to control the things that we can control. We get a little short with our attitudes. We get a little bit, and we use justification for why we've let our attitudes be a certain way. We start saying yes and no to things that normally we wouldn't care that much about, right? And all of a sudden those become like hills to die on, and there's a level of passion behind it that's like, this seems disproportionate to why this is such a big deal. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then the last is there's a compromise in convictions. So Saul should have been convinced in the faithfulness of Samuel. Samuel's proven at this point.
By literally the whole nation.
Yeah, Samuel is not an unknown, unproven leader for Israel. So there's a big piece of this that Saul should have just rested in. Hey, I'm convinced if Samuel said 7 days, something must have happened. I'm going to chill.
Yeah.
But he doesn't. He lets the things he should have been convinced of, convictions, right? Convictions are the things we become convinced of. Those become compromised through that process. When I let that spirit of FOMO sort of wash over. So again, the spirit of FOMO, impatience with others, insecurity with yourself, control over your circumstances, and compromise in your convictions.
Yeah. So now, with that...
So how do we resist this? let's get into the good stuff. Now that we know what it is, or some signs that we see that it produces, what are we going to do about it?
Right. Decision number 1. I must embrace persistent obedience when pressured to compromise. We see in 1 Samuel 10:8, it says, you shall go down to Gilgal, and behold, I am coming to offer burnt offerings.
That's what Samuel says.
Yeah, 7 days you shall wait. And then in 1 Samuel 13, verses 8 through 9, it says, he waited 7 days, the appointed time by Samuel, but Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and the people were scattering from him.
That was my stomach.
That was like...
I don't know if that got caught. Sorry. I'm hungry. It's time for lunch.
Be persistent.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So unpack this for us.
You know, like what we were saying, like we can kind of sympathize with Saul, and like these are real things. Like he's not really doing it for himself. Like he's literally seeing his people being scattered. He's seeing a threat coming towards him. He's been told to wait. He waited. Like you have these real things that he kind of obeyed most of it.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just like until the time came and he has the altar ready and the offerings there, that when he sees Israel kind of not uniform and people are hiding and people are scared, it was like even people were following him like trembling, like they were not saying for 7 days. Like he was like, you know what, I'm gonna pull it, and then he only got through half of the offerings. He only did the burnt offerings before Samuel came. But I think that attests to our walk with God. There's going to be things that that kind of make sense for us to compromise, and when the Lord kind of tells us something but it's not really turning out the way we thought it would, we can often be like, oh, but God, you didn't tell me it was going to be like that. Or we can kind of have that attitude with the Lord when the Lord is just kind of like, you knew what you should have done.
Mm-hmm.
And I made it abundantly clear.
Mm-hmm.
Because Samuel didn't just say, wait 7 days, and I'll show you what you need to do. Like there's kind of two halves to that. Did Saul know what he needed to do? Probably not, because that's not his realm. Like you said, like he's getting into other people's lanes. What do you think?
Well, I think there's persistent obedience is, I think we have a tendency to want to be obedient when it suits what we understand or the scope of what we feel we can justify. And there's a lot in Scripture that, I'll say it this way. I think part of living by faith is being obedient, even though I haven't had this set of experiences yet to justify these decisions. Does that make sense? So I have to persistently obey God. And in doing so, over time, I begin to see the fruit of what it's like to persistently obey God. But when you're young, I know when I was young, I remember when my parents started talking to me about tithing, to the church. And that was like, man, that's a lot of money. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now, I'm getting $1 for my allowance. So I'm breaking that dollar down into 90 cents and, and then I get $5 and that's 50 cents. So I don't have $5. I have $4.50.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you could extract that out I pick on money because money's easy to measure and it's where most of us live. But like now, I don't even think about setting money aside the way God calls us to set aside. Because I've seen the long-term benefits of the way it shapes our mentality, the way it shapes the way we organize our resources. Your mom, we don't have to think about the way we some type of entertainment that we watch or ways that we choose to interact with our neighbors, or we don't wonder if we never ask the question, what are we going to do this Sunday? It's what are we going to do after church on Sunday? Because what do we do on Sundays?
Yeah.
We go to church. So there's this persistent, this habitual way of being obedient that leads into, I don't ever wake up going like, I wonder if we should go to church today or not. Like, that's not, I'm not going to say that every morning I wake up, it's, oh yeah, I get to go to church. Sometimes it's like, okay, we're going to go to church and, I would really like to sleep in a little bit more today or something like that. But we're going to go nonetheless.
Yeah.
So I think there's this, like, one of the ways we deal with, because the FOMO will always convince you that what you're doing now isn't, there's something better happening somewhere else. And so persistent obedience is kind of that faithful posture that says the best thing I can do right now is be persistently obedient to what God has told me to do.
And then I think that also goes hand in hand. And when you're persistently obedient, you're more content than you've ever been. And like, you're more less anxious about going to go see something. You kind of start looking around at the roses and the birds and being more gracious and delighted by the things that you already have and the things that the Lord is doing.
Yeah.
So that's decision number 1. Decision number 2 is I prepare for faithful obedience when pressured to take control. In 1 Samuel 13:12, it says, I said, now the Philistines will come down against me at Gilgal, and I have not sought the favor of the Lord, so I forced myself and offered the burnt suffering. Or the burnt offering. The burnt suffering. As I was like reading this, I was reminded of a line our pastor said yesterday. And he said, like, the thing that you, like, when you don't know what you should do what you know. And it's like in that moment, like, Samuel knew what he should have done. Saul, sorry. But he didn't. Yeah. And he kind of took what he thought was right in the moment.
Yeah. And sometimes the answer to the question, what should I do? The answer to the question is nothing. You're supposed to wait. That's your job right now. Wait. Yeah, but what else can I do? Nothing. Sit down and wait.
Yeah, because that's a spiritual fruit, is patience.
Is patience.
The Lord never calls us to a hurried faith or a hustle.
Yeah.
Hustled spirit. I don't know if that doesn't even sound good.
Yeah, it doesn't. But you can sense the temptation towards that, right? Every day, how, like, the way we manage our time. And I've gotten better with this, but man, when I was younger, I did not manage my time very well. I was constantly doing things right up until the minute that I didn't allow for any margin. So if I've got to be somewhere at 2:00, guess what time I was walking in the door? 2:00. That's what I had in my head. I didn't have the idea of showing up early. And so if it was 10 minutes away, what time am I leaving the house? 1:50. Well, so the minute I get behind somebody that's slow in traffic, how's my attitude towards that person?
Not great.
Not great. And it has nothing to do with them. And it has nothing to do with the event I'm supposed to be at. It has everything to do with the way I manage my time. because I did not build in margin for those kind of things to take place.
Yeah.
And so Saul didn't ask, hey, just by the way, you said 7 days. If you're not there after just 7 days, what should I do? Because Samuel probably would have gone like, I'm going to be there no earlier than 7 days. This is not a no later than. This is a no earlier than, right? It's going to take me at least 7 days to gather up with you. Okay, what do you want me to do if you don't show up by 7 days? Nothing. Just chill, bro. Yeah, but what if people are starting to scatter away? Okay.
Let them.
That is not on you. I know you feel that, but that is not like, I will show up. And I can't help but think that Saul may have been living with, there's been a lot of amazing people in God's history that have preceded Saul. Like, Moses and Joshua, and, you start going through all the judges, because all of that was before. No, that was after these guys?
No.
This is before. Yeah, it was both
Joshua
before these
judges
guys.
Ruth, and then First Samuel.
Like, there's all of these characters. He would have known the story about Samson. He would have known the story about Gideon. He would have known the story about all of these amazing men, women that were faithful to God and were this, were individuals who bolstered strength or were cautionary warnings, right? And so I could see Saul going, well, I'm the next guy. I'm supposed to do something. I'm the first king. Israel's never had a king before. And that's a lot of pressure to take on to oneself. And but what ends up happening is he doesn't posture his heart for faithful obedience. He feels the pressure of that moment to take control of his series of events. And people, I'm sure there's somebody listening to this who they're on their way to their a new job where they're the new person, and there's going to be that pressure to take control of something, or, that you're going through a medical issue, or there's some family dynamic taking place, or you're going to a new school, or, whatever the context is, you're entering into something that's uncertain and something that's unfamiliar. And FOMO will bleed into your heart, the spirit of fear of missing out, that you're not doing something right. You're missing out on getting a good reputation or taking advantage of the opportunity. And it's going to, suck the life out of you. And so one of the ways you're going to find yourself tempted is to wanting to take control of the situation. When the Lord's going, I just need you, before you get there, I just need you to prepare to be faithful. Like, what have you, I just need you to be faithful. That's it. Don't worry about this other stuff.
That's good.
Decision 3.
Yeah.
I practice patient obedience when people express disappointment.
In 1 Samuel 11, it says, Samuel said, "What have you done?" And Saul said, when I saw that the people were scattering from me, then he did the burnt offerings. And I don't know what the role of the burnt offering symbolize. Maybe but it's not like he was like, let's battle up for war, let's go against them. It's like, let's burn these things.
Well, there was offerings.
Was it for seeking the Lord's help?
Yeah, it could be. There's a bunch of things. We don't actually get a lot of backstory as to what the motivating factors are behind giving these offerings, right?
It's like setting off fireworks.
But it's unto the Lord, right? It's probably going to be a centralizing event. So when people see these, they see the smoke or they smell the smells, right? Because it's a very tactile experience. People hear these stuff, they see this stuff, they smell this stuff. That it probably would have gathered people together. Because if you think about it, up to this point in Israel's history, one of the ways that God would gather his people is in the context of worship. And so in the context of worship and out of worship, God will establish his victory. Well, what are the people in need of right now? They're in need of knowing God's presence, and that despite these oppressive forces that are around them, they're going to experience the victory that God has for them. And I think that's where, when we're facing kind of pressures and uncertainties and difficulties like that, like practicing that patience, even when I may disappoint people, becomes really, really critical. Like years ago, it was actually my first tour in the Navy. I was with Marine Air Group 14, MAG 14, and MAG 13. 14. Why would I say 13? I was with MAG 14, and I took care of like 5 different squadrons. And so inevitably there would be a conflict in the calendar where 2 or 3 of the squadrons wanted me to come support them at some event or training or some meeting or whatever the case may be. And so I was constantly letting them know, hey, I can't come to your thing because I'm going to this other squadron's thing. And so I came up with this phrase at the time that I hadn't really, I'm sure it's out there and maybe I stole it from somebody, so I apologize if I did, but it was this thing I realized as a leader in that kind of environment where there's all of these demand signals coming your way, is that you have to cultivate the strength to be misunderstood. And so I could give justification, hey, I can't support your training event because at that time I'm supporting this other squadron's training event. And remember how I supported your event last month? Well, I supported your event last month and I told them no last month. So now I'm telling them yes, and I have to tell you no. And so there becomes this, like, I'm managing these expectations, which means I'm also managing disappointment. And I think there's a big part that if somebody has that fear of disappointing people, that I'm fear of what I'll miss out on if I disappoint someone. What if I don't pick that guy to be on my ball team? And he said, if I picked him, he'd invite me to his birthday party. Right? Now I've disappointed him, so I'm not going to get the invite. And if I'm not going to get the invite, then I'm not going to be in that group of that social group or in that. Do you know what I mean? And these things get into us really young. This is not stuff that like we go like, oh man, 35. I've never really thought about this stuff before. Like, no, this is stuff that we start having to figure out how to navigate when we're 3, 4, 5 years old. And then it, kind of blossoms out and finds a variety of expressions as we grow older in life. And so I think there's that, like, what does it look like to practice patient obedience? Like that sort of like, no, I'm going to be patient. I'm not in a rush. And if you're disappointed by that, I've got to be okay with that. I don't, and I'm not even saying I completely understand what I'm facing right now.
Yeah.
It's like years ago, I remember, I was at a Bible college, and my senior year, I was planning on going to Wesley Biblical Seminary, and I'll go into the details of this in an episode that we have coming up. But I was going to graduate from Bible college, go to Wesley Biblical Seminary to get my Master's of Divinity, and then go to Oregon, where I would presumably go back to Oregon, which was home for me, and pastor a church out there. Well, when the Lord, clear as day, the Lord led me to go work at our radio station that was associated with Bible college. And it was this small radio station. I have no idea how many listeners we had. The type of programming wasn't a type of programming that I was really interested in. Like, I didn't have a passion for the work that was there. I didn't have a lot of interest for the work that was there. Technically, I admired the work that they did. And I remember there was a deeply influential pastor in my life who visited us at campus one day. And he took me out for dinner. And he was, how's your grades going? How's school going? He knew I was with Bethany. How are you and Bethany doing? And he goes, so what's this I hear about you going to the radio station instead of seminary? And I said, well, yeah, I can't explain it, but that's the next step the Lord has for us. And he looked at me and he said, you're making a massive mistake right now by doing that. And I don't know who's talking to you. I don't know what kind of influences you're having in your life. I don't know why you think this is a good idea. But I am down here to straighten you out and let you know God is not in this. I mean, it was like, and this was a person that had massive impact in my life. I don't want to call them out. But it's like, I cannot overstate the spiritual impact this person had on our, not just my life, but like the Curtis family, right? And I remember looking at him and going, I have to do this. Like, this is what the Lord has next for me. And I can't explain it. And I don't know why I'm supposed to be doing this. And every reason you just stated as to why this doesn't make sense, I completely agree with. But this is what I have to do. And he left that meeting kind of upset with me. That was the impression I got anyway.
Well,
yeah.
But you have to be okay with that.
Well,
because if that's the Lord.
I had to be okay with disappointing him. And in a lot of ways, for all of us, there's people we're okay disappointing. Do you know what I mean? Like, your opinion of me doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
But who's on that list of folks that you do not want to disappoint? You do not want to have that kind of conversation I had to have with that guy.
Yeah.
Where they look at you and say, the way you're leading your life is wrong. And I think that's where, like, what we see in this example for Saul is he should have been able to go like, if nobody ever follows me as king, I'm okay with that. That's not an easy thing. Then is he even a king?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Is he a king because people followed him, or is he king because he was anointed by God? Like, where is that coming from? And that kind of patient obedience says, I don't need these external validations to live out what God has called me to live out. Like, I will be patiently obedient with what the Lord has laid in front of me, even if it disappoints everybody along the way. Like, that's a level of surrender I think a lot of folks have to wrestle with. And you'll have to wrestle with it more than once.
I was talking to Mom right before we recorded, and I was like reading the passage, and she was like, Saul did like 90% of like what the Lord commanded him. And like that kind of like hit, and how the Lord will call us into seasons where we give 90%, and then that 10% is like either envy, impatience, what were the other four? Insecurity, we want control, or we'll compromise. Like that it could be so little as 5 or 10%. And then that's the thing that the Lord calls, nope, all that's disobedience. Like, because like Saul waited the 7 days. He got both sacrifices ready. He was at the place that Samuel told him to be at. He's watching his people. Like, he's doing the things up until this point. But it's like this, where is he? Did he really fall through? I guess I just got to do my own thing. And because of that, he no longer has the kingdom. Like, Samuel was like, the Lord was going to have you. Like, what did it say? It sounded like it was going to be like a generational thing. For then the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever.
Yeah.
But now your kingdom shall not continue, shall not go to your sons. It is going straight to a man after the Lord's own heart. And the Lord has commanded him to be prince over his people because you have not kept the Lord's commandment. And I mean, I was like, thanks, Mom. Like, now what things have I given 90% to?
Well, I think that even leads us to the decision 4, right?
Yeah.
Which is I live with surrendered obedience when given the power to manipulate outcomes. And in the New Testament it says, offer your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God. This is your reasonable act of service. Okay. And old timers, like preaching old timers used to say, I don't hear folks say it very much anymore. Maybe it's who I'm listening to, but they say, the problem with living sacrifices is they have a tendency to want to crawl off the altar. Right? So there's this aspect where the Lord, when he says, I need you to be a living sacrifice, meaning everything has become surrendered to my purposes. Everything has become sacrificial, and it's devotion to me. Yeah. And I think that's, like you said, or like your mom was talking about, we want to play the I did most of it game.
Yeah.
Right? Well, I got it. I did 90% of it. That's still an A.
Yeah.
And I think that's and this is in contrast to what we're saying here, which is I live with surrendered obedience when given the power to manipulate outcomes. Because I think I don't know. We don't know what Saul's motives were. We're not told what his motives were.
We just know what he did.
We just know what he did. But I wonder if he wasn't doing that because he thought, well, if it doesn't matter who starts the fire for these sacrifices.
It will just be a pleasing aroma to the Lord.
It's what's important is that people show up. And if they show up, then we can kind of guarantee that we'll be okay as a nation, as a people. And I think I see this happen over time with people that I've followed or even personal friends of mine that have carried leadership, whether it's been in ministry or in the corporate world, where they start off really good. There is that surrendered obedience, but then there's outcomes that they're experiencing they don't want. And so they begin to reshape things to get to the outcomes they do want. Like the things I've heard I'm a preacher, so I pay attention to preachers. The things I've heard preachers preach in church, and the justification is, well, my people aren't really spiritually ready to hear something different than that. Right? It's like, so what are you saying? Well, if I were to really preach that, they'd leave. So you're manipulating an outcome. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. You're trying to keep folks from behaving or acting in a certain way, and that's not your responsibility. Now, I'm not saying you do things to drive people away, but I'm also saying you don't do things to try to. Jesus didn't do anything to gather a crowd. He just did what the Father told him to do, and crowds gathered. They also scattered, right? Yeah. And when he did what the Lord told him to do. So, like the size of the crowd and the size of the influence and the impact, all of it. I'm not saying we are neglectful of and don't steward opportunities well, but what I am saying is it can't come at the expense of surrendered obedience. Yeah. Like surrendered obedience has to be primary in our life, because if it's not, that FOMO that can creeps into everybody, will begin to infect our souls, and we will begin to kind of go. We'll live towards surrendered outcome, not surrendered obedience.
Yeah. And like I heard a really good definition of what FOMO is, and it was like making moves on what could be or what could happen or potential outcomes. Like it's nothing that's guaranteed.
Yeah.
At all. So yeah. Anyway, and also like what you were saying, like you don't know what Saul's posture was in this. Was it just to gather the people, or was it to pay homage to the Lord and show reverence to the Lord? Because the Lord takes like worship seriously.
Yeah. So. Well, and I think too, we don't know what it was, but we all know ourselves. And I think this is one of the things sometimes the scripture affords. There's a difference between eisegesis and exegesis, right? Exegesis is we extract out what the Lord has for us from his word. Eisegesis is when we layer in. So I'm not advocating for eisegesis, because that's not how the scriptures were intended to be read. Having said that, I think sometimes the scripture is a bit silent on some things, because the Lord wants to use our own imagination to go, what would your motives have been if you were in that situation? If, that would have resulted in these things. And what was motivated you may be different than what motivated somebody else. Nonetheless, that's a motivation the Lord may want to call you to surrender, that the Lord may want to sanctify in your souls. And I think that's, one of the reasons why we're doing this podcast is like, how do we enter into these kind of conversations? How do we look through scripture, reflect on the past, anticipate the future? God wants to do great things in the future. We'll also discover what he's doing today, right? Like, what is God up to today? Well, right now we live in a culture, we just went over the stats at the beginning, where, people are living with this, or they're shaping life decisions that have downstream effects based upon the fear of missing out. And that's a miserable way to live. It will rob you, if it hasn't already, of joy and contentment and peace and just all of the things that come with living a life that is in God's Spirit.
Yeah.
So,
with that,
I
hope you guys have a great week. Just to kind of go over the 3 decisions. First is to embrace persistent obedience when pressured to compromise. Decision 2, I'm prepared for faithful obedience when pressured to take control. Decision 3, I practice patient obedience when people express disappointment. And decision 4, I live with surrendered obedience when given the power to manipulate outcomes.
And all these things, all these notes, you can
find them
on our show notes.
Who thought?
There's a link in the podcast that if you're listening to this podcast, if you look in the descriptions portion, you can see the link there. You can sign up for our newsletter because we'll share all this out as well as a link to the show notes, which is a really great way to kind of capture some of this stuff. I know it was a while ago now, but I had somebody reach out to me. They're like, hey, can you text me those notes? And I was like, well, here's the link that has all of the notes. And then we created the newsletter so that person's now signed up for our newsletter so that they can get it directly to them. And we'd like to give that to you. So if you are signed up for the newsletter, we know who some of you are. Alex signed up for the newsletter. Yeah.
No way.
Ross signed up.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, okay. No, I'm actually genuinely, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
He's going to get a text message right now.
Yeah. I saw him at church yesterday. He's like, I signed up. And I was like, I saw that. Yeah. Yeah. We've got like, anyway, well, thanks for signing up. We appreciate that. It lets us stay in contact with you. Thank you all for listening. If you'd like to get a hold of us, you can email us, hello@thisresilientsoul.com. We're on all the social medias. Look up for Resilient Lineage, and you'll find all the different ways and places that you can get a hold of us. You can find Olivia on Instagram, Facebook.
Just find my name.
Yep, just look up her name. You can find me as well, Milo Curtis. We'd love to be able to be in touch with you. If you have any ideas on episodes that you'd like to hear us, or topics you'd like to hear us talk about in a future episode, let us know. We welcome that opportunity. We thank you all for listening, and we pray that you go with God and be at peace.